Good evening. My name is Jay. I'm the Arts and Culture Director here at the Korea Society. Welcome to the Korea Society tonight. Thank you so much for coming out on this rainy day. I hope that after this lecture, you'll have a chance to check out our current exhibition by Ik Jung Kang called Moonjar Longing for Home. And if you have any questions about the exhibition, please just find me. So tonight, we have a very special talk titled 32nd Street, Then and Now. So if you are a New Yorker, I'm sure there is a great chance that you have visited at least once the neighborhood that is known as Koreatown in Manhattan, which is the few blocks east of 32nd Street and Broadway. Koreans and non-Koreans visit the neighborhoods, and they have for many decades to eat, to drink, to sing, to shop, to get a haircut. But have you ever wondered why here on this 32nd Street is the Koreatown? When did Koreans start to come to New York City and do business there? Why 32nd Street? When and how did it become the thriving center that is today one of the most distinguished ethnic neighborhood, for the lack of better words, in the city? So tonight, Dr. Jinwon Kim will provide us with some answers. Dr. Jinwon Kim earned her doctorate in sociology at Graduate Center City University of New York, and she's an assistant professor of sociology at New York City College of Technology, City University of New York. Her research explores themes of urban sociology, transnational and global sociology, immigration, Asian and Asian American studies. She served as one of the editors for Koreatown, exploring the economics, politics, and identities of Korean spatial formation, which is going to be published this year, and which is about the global Koreatowns, not just the Koreatowns in the New York City. And she is currently working on her book specifically about the Koreatown in Manhattan. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Jinwon Kim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. And I'm so much happy to see you guys here on a rainy day. And I was really tired after my work is done. And, it's like, okay, am I going to see a lot of people at the Korean Society? Then I'm so much impressed to see you guys here tonight. And thank you, Jay, and also the Korean Society for organizing these events. And I'm so much excited to have such a great opportunity to communicate with the general public because, I'm an academic and I'm a sociologist. I always, I've been talking about my research and I'm talking about Koreatown in the past few years, but usually, I present my work at a conference, and it's my first time, honestly, to talk about this, in front of the general public. So I'm really excited. So today I'm gonna divide my talk into three categories. First of all, we are gonna have an overview of Koreatown, and then we're gonna move to the history of Koreatown and current issues. And finally, current issues by focusing on food consumption in Koreatown. It seems like everyone is interested in food in New York City, so I was thinking that probably going to be more interesting to pay attention to current issues rather than something else. So here we go. Quick guide about Koreatown. How many of you guys here have been to Koreatown on 32nd Street? Yes. And how many of you guys know how many Koreatowns we have in New York City? Yeah, we have two Koreatowns in New York City, one on 32nd Street, and the other one is in Flushing. So there are, but even though there is more dense population of Koreans in Flushing, I'm gonna more focus on 32nd Street in Manhattan as a hub of Korean culture, and tonight. So let's talk about location. Koreatown in Manhattan is located on 32nd Street between Fifth Avenue and Broadway. It looks like it's just a short one block, but it's extending to 35th Street and 6th Street, even 31st and 30th Street, and also it's moving toward more Madison Avenue, beyond the Fifth Avenue. Locations matter for Koreatown to become so much, popular. We have several, train coming to Herald Square. It's really prime location for public transit. And also 32nd Street is walking distance from various, tourist attractions such as, your public library, Madison Square Garden, Union Square, and also there's, Grand Central in walking distance. So location is a really critical factor for Koreatown in Manhattan to become so much popular and flourished. Then let's look at two pictures here. Can anyone explain the difference between two? Obviously, first photo was taken on 32nd Street, and I got the random photo from online. And definitely that picture was taken in Flushing. So what is the main difference between two Koreatown in terms of physical landscape? Yeah, very good answer. The first photo, Koreatown in Manhattan is so vertical. A lot of times, Korean business owners tend to open their business not only on the first floor, but also on the second, third, and fourth, and fifth floor, which is pretty much common practice in East Asia, but it's not really common practice in American cities, including New York City. Who could think that they would open restaurants on second and third floors in New York City, right? But as you can see, the second picture, obviously, Flushing Koreatown is much more spread out, just like many other ethnic enclaves in American cities, including Los Angeles, Koreatown, right? You can see obvious difference between two. And this is the landscape of Koreatown in Manhattan. And I do pay attention how transnational this Koreatown is. And we're gonna talk about that a bit later, but these are all the stores that you can find in Koreatown, except the first one because the building was torn down a few years ago. Little bit of personal story. I was out of the city for 3 years. I worked in Ohio and upstate New York. When I came back to the city last summer to start my new job, I was like, what is going on here? It's, things change so quickly, even within 3 years. But you still see Paris Baguette, Gangneung Baekjeong, you see the beauty salon, Cafe Bene, which was really popular in Korea a few years ago, but you don't really find those stores anymore in Seoul. Anyway, and also we see bookstores there. Then we're gonna explore what happened on 32nd Street in the past. So a little bit of background of information about immigration history of Korean and Korean Americans. So, the first group of Korean immigrants to the United States were mostly farm workers who moved to Hawaii at the beginning of the 20th century. But things were a little bit different in New York City, especially on the East Coast. In early 20th centuries, most of the immigrants were students and political dissidents during Japanese occupation. Famous, people who fought for freedom during Japanese occupation, and these are people who made one of the earliest group of Koreans who came to the United States. In the 50s and 60s, of course, after Korean War, there are a lot of war brides who marry American GI persons, servicemen, and also war orphans who adopted to American family, and also students. So, but things to change in the post-65 era. I also teach immigration. Whenever I, teach immigration to my students, I always say that, what happened to 65? How that changed American racial mosaic? And of course, that established a racist quota system that extremely favored Northern Europeans, giving more opportunity for Southern, European, Eastern Europeans as well as Asian immigrants to the United States. And then in the 1980s and 1990s, the Korea population, going back to 65 Immigration Act, I have to mention that a lot of Korean immigrants back then were pretty much privileged. They're from Seoul, they have a college degree, they're highly educated, but then they were not able to find a job in American mainstream because of racism and also language barrier. So their option was a lot of Korean immigrants at the time tend to sell their assets and brought them money to America, and they can make investment into small businesses. So that's the background information. And 80s and 90s, Korea population became much more diversified. And especially you can see students and tourists coming to United States, including New York City. We did not have political freedom until 1980s, but the Foreign Travel Liberalization Act was enacted in 1989, enabling a lot of Koreans to travel overseas. So that's the background information. But because of economic boom in 1980s, you can see a declining number of permanent immigrants and number of permanent immigrants have declined over time. So that's a graph that you can see for what happened on 32nd Street. So there is so-called Broadway Korean business district. There used to be a lot of wholesalers there, but they left. If you walk down streets between 24th Street and 31st Street, probably between 5th Avenue and 6th Avenue, there are a lot of Korean wholesalers. But because the rent is too high nowadays, that they move out of city to New Jersey and Queens. But the beginning of Korean business district were created by those wholesale businesses. Koreatown, Korean community has been always transnational. Vegan industry was really key for Korean business people at that time. And those products are mostly imported from South Korea when Korean junta government emphasized export and highly emphasized export of a product. So, even they went back to Korea, invest into vegan industry, and they brought those products to the United States. So that's what happened in New York City. And early and mid 1980s, so there are business people out there, and also people who work for them, and mostly Korean, they need some restaurants to eat lunch or dinner. So Koreatown, Manhattan, 32nd Street began to offer some services for more immigrants at that time. So, early 1980s were beginning stage of 32nd Street. And the later time, of course, you see new population there. So if you look at restaurant itself, Mission was considered the first Korean restaurant in New York City and was introduced by Craig Claiborne, who is really famous food critic in New York Times. He was also a Korean War veteran. Yeah, for side note. And, he introduced Mission in New York Times. You can see that article on the New York Times. And these are all, you don't have to know all the detail, but these are all the restaurants which were opened in 1970s and 80s. And you can see that those restaurants are scattered, but nearby, but they are mostly clustered in Midtown because it's closer to Korean business district. And you can see the first Korean restaurant on 32nd Street, Seoul House, was opened in 1972. Then you see New Gomtang, which is closed now, but they moved from 27th Street to 32nd Street in 1982, sorry. So you can see that. And, if you focus on the restaurants on 32nd Street, Seoul House, then Goryeo Bookstore opened in 1980. In 1982, New York Gumtang, then you can see other businesses followed. Yep, but then why and how come Koreans began occupying 32nd Street? Do you guys guess? Can you guys guess who who were there before Koreans came? Yeah, I think I heard the Jews, right? Yeah, that's true. So 32nd Street was a part of a garment district, and there were Jewish entrepreneurs and Italian and Irish workers who were working for those garment factories. But why did they leave Koreatown? Then how come Koreans came in? What do you mean? Oh, they made they sold that kind of stuff like a clothing, wigs. But the most important thing was second and third generation Jewish Americans did not want to continue their business. They achieved world mobility and found a job outside of their ethnic circle, found a job in American mainstream. Then what can they do? They sold their business to Koreans. And Koreans had money. They are middle class, right? They sold their asset and they made investment. And they couldn't find a job in American mainstream. It was perfect timing. Then, look at this. Do you guys know there was a welfare hotel on 32nd Street in the 70s and 80s? A lot of old timers would still remember what was going on 32nd Street, the Hotel Martinique. That was one of the biggest and notorious welfare hotels in New York City. They offer emergency shelter to homeless families between 1973 and 1989, meaning that it wasn't really attractive space for a lot of Americans. So when I had an interview with one of the old timers in Koreatown, she talks about how hard it was for her to operate her business during that time. And, people think it was dangerous. People didn't want to come or walk down the street, but they still have a business out there, but it wasn't really easy time. But at the same time, they gave opportunity for Korean business persons, so they didn't have to compete with others. And rent was cheap. Now, Koreatown is one of the most, rent in Koreatown is Koreatown is offered one of the most expensive rent across the city, but it wasn't really true at the time. So you can see the news coverage there about the welfare hotel. So that is the history of Koreatown before or overlapping time when Koreans coming in. Then we're gonna move to New Koreatown, which is based on my research. So what I'm gonna talk about, I'm gonna share a lot of interview data with you. And I had an interview with 132 individuals between 2008 and 2017, 18, yeah. And including 3 consumer groups, Korean nationals, Korean Americans, and Korean non-Koreans. And that could be really interesting to see how different groups perceive Koreatown and how come they come up with a different kind of idea about the space over time. So New Koreatown, when I began my research back in 2008, I always thought that Koreatown was for Korean-speaking Korean. Then when I talk to my Korean American friend, they're like, that's interesting. I just see Korean Americans all the time. Then I was like, that's probably true. But I didn't really see non-Asian consumers in Koreatown before 2010. If I do, of course, they usually come there with Asian friend. I didn't know whether they are Koreans or non-Koreans, but obviously they are accompanied by Asian folks. But things got changed since 2010. Suddenly, Koreatown and Korean food got a lot of media attention. There always new, I mean, there are a lot of New York Times coverage that introduced Korean food to general public. Suddenly, people, when I began my research, people were like, yeah, Koreatown, who cares? I was like, I care. But, people are not interested in it at the time. But, since 2010, oh, Korean food. Yeah, people do like talking about it, right? And also, I was born and raised in Seoul. I came to New York City when I was 27 to go to graduate school. So I recognized there was increasing number of Korean franchise on 32nd Street. That was a really big difference in the end. And you see public-private partnership, and also there's emergence of Korean American chefs, which you're gonna have another talk in 2 weeks. So that's a new trend. Then I began to think about what happened. Then when I had an interview with one Korean American person, he was telling me that it's all about branding. That really stuck in my mind for days. Then I began to research about the Asian branding project done by Korean government at the time. It was really when Lee Myung-bak became a president, he really emphasized globalization of Korean food at that time. So I trace back to 1997 to think about why Korean government, the transnational, invested into new industry, including food. So that was background because, in the post 1997, in order to overcome the financial crisis in South Korea, they really pay attention to new industry. The biggest industry that you can find, making a lot of money to South Korea is game industry. That brings a lot of revenue to South Korea too. K-pop is one of the things, and of course IT. But why New York City? New York City was one of the major market for Korean government and franchise stores. Because New York City, they consider New York City as mecca of global culture and global market. Also, there are Korean community out there. If there are established ethnic community where you can have easy access to Korean-speaking Koreans, why don't we take advantage of that, right? So, of course, Los Angeles was important, but New York City was highly emphasized in North America by Korean government. They even organized the Eastern United States Korean Cuisine Globalization Committee. I don't know what that means. I don't know how they come up with the name. That was so long, but they're pretty much active around 2010. They organized, they sponsored the food-related events. They even had a food truck to sample out Korean food across the city to promote Korean food. It was funded by Korean government, right? And a lot of times those participants of the community were old-timers, Korean restaurant owners who own restaurants in Flushing, 32nd Street in New Jersey. Those Korean business owners in Koreatown are not small business owners, to be honest. They're awesome. But they tend to have multiple stores across the city and in New Jersey. So even you can see the picture there, the Taste of Korea. If you participate in the committee, you can get the banner from Korean government. And they used to hang in front of their restaurant. You can guarantee the taste of Korean food, by the way. And around 2010, you see that these are franchise and chain stores, surprisingly. The Gyeocheon closed their business a few years ago, but we still have a lot of Korean fried chicken stores, including BBQ, Perikana, and also Bonchon is still there, right? Then in 2014 was a really big year for Korean food. A lot of media attention, including Anthony Bourdain. He even went to Korea. And when I was making this slide, actually Anthony Bourdain is just somewhere here. But I wasn't able to get his face in here anyway, for some reason. He introduced Korean food to American audience. Even he went to Los Angeles, Koreatown, and talked about LA riots in his episode on Koreatown. It was really impressive. But why? I'm a sociologist. I do pay attention to macro changes and structural changes to cause the change. The changes. And I'm gonna point out two things: domestic factors to, cause those changes. In the past, a lot of American elites obviously paid attention to certain cultural products. So if you pay attention to food, obviously French cuisine was extremely consumed by American elite. But it has extended to American middle class. But those elites still wanted to differentiate themselves from middle class Americans. So they need to find something else, ethnic cuisine, something new, and you need to show off your broader knowledge on food, right? Rather than just know French cuisine, you need to know not only French cuisine, but also Vietnamese, Peruvian, Korean, Chinese, Japanese. But Chinese and Japanese cuisines are already in mainstream, right? They need to find something else. Vietnamese, Thai, and Korean, right? And also they emphasize authentic experience. Whenever you talk about food, whenever you read about food, they always say authentic flavor. I don't know what that is. I'm still figuring out what that is. It seems like authenticity is overrated, and some people criticize that, but we talk about authenticity all the time, right? So when you think about Koreatown's authenticity, obviously nowadays it's defined by its food. But when you think of authenticity, what kind of word do you come up with? Ethnicity, local, anti-commercialism, things like that. But Korean food in Koreatown is consumed and sold in the marketplace. Is it really authentic? It's commercialized. So I was asking so many questions to myself about this. Then, is authenticity lost? It is commercialized? It's not cooked by your grandmother. It's cooked by someone else, right? So in order to understand or answer questions, I pay attention to individual voices of consumers. So I'm gonna introduce how Korean nationals, Korean Americans, and non-Koreans perceive or understand authenticity or authentic flavor of Korean food in Koreatown. So for Korean nationals, when I ask first impression of Koreatown to Korean nationals, their instant response is 구리다. That could be translated into probably outdated, old-fashioned, but in negative way. And they would say it's really dirty. It's dirtier than any other street across the city. And they don't think Korean food in New York City is authentic and it tastes different from what they eat in Korea. They can't catch a new trend in South Korea, and their taste is disturbed by immigrants and their children. It's not the food of what we grew up eating. A lot of the times, those Korean nationalists compare and contrast old Koreatown, old Seoul and Koreatown. They say it looks like Seoul in the 70s and 80s. If they are generous, they could say, it looks like 90s. But then they have specific evidence about that, oftentimes. So you can see, Minji's respond to Koreatown, and even a lot of times a lot of interviews said, "I feel shamed over Koreatown because a lot of non-Koreans would think Korea would look like this. It shouldn't be like that. Korea is a modernized, core, interesting country, but Koreatown does not really reflect what it is." So interestingly enough, a lot of Korean nationals reinvent authenticity. So we talk about authenticity, emphasize local settings, anti-commercialism. If we follow that definition, immigrant-owned stores should be most authentic, right? But Koreans think that Korean franchise are most authentic businesses because that delivers actual Korean flavor to American public. That's what we eat, that's what we experience back home. So authenticity is really complicating, especially within Korean ethnic community. For Korean Americans, of course, they do understand Korean food differently based on how they understand US racial order. Now, when you talk about food, when you grow up, a lot of times Korean Americans have a traumatized experience about their lunchboxes, right? That's pretty common, not only for Korean American, but also many other Asians, right? If you look at Fresh Off the Boat, obviously, there is one scene about that. And Laura, who grew up in predominantly white neighborhood, she still remember her, friends in her neighborhood came over and saw jar of kimchi, and they really thought that was disgusting. And that looks like a brain. She was really specific about that, and her experience was shared by many, many other Korean Americans. But at the same time, you know, a lot of times those young adults who came to New York City to go to school or to work, they don't cook at home. But they do have memory of Korean food cooked by their mother, grandparents, you just name it, right? So Korean food, flavor of Korean food or memory of a Korean food is transferred in commercialized space, which is Koreatown for a lot of Korean Americans. So Ben was, an NIU student when I had an interview with him, and he was really dedicated food blogger at the time. And, he shared his experience about Korean food, like on the first day in New York City. When his parents left, he got a call from his friend, and, instantly he was like, "I want to have kalguksu," which is like he has this distinctive memory about the food because he was born in Korea, and he came to the United States when he was 6 years old, but he still remembered how his grandmother was cooking that food for him. So that was the first food that he had when on the first day in New York City. So that's kind of, you can see there is kind of emotional attachment to the space for among Korean Americans, which is different from Korean nationals. I mean, Korean nationals, a lot of times they're gonna leave, they're gonna go back home, right? And for Korean Americans, Koreatown is authentic, of course. They do develop their transnational tie to their motherland. And some people often talk about emotional attachment to Koreatown. Sunmi, 42 years old, the building manager was talking about, the space grew up as I grew up. I still remember Koreatown back in 1970s and 80s. The non-Koreans, so that is the, shot from Korean TV drama. My name is Kim Sun, and I'm gonna point out three things about non-Koreans. First, a lot of times non-Koreans are pretty much adventurous about food. You can see from Elena's interview, my family was always adventurous with food. What do you mean by adventurous? You suddenly discover there is something unique, right? Then second point I want to make is a lot of times media influence, right? You watch Korean drama and you see Koreans eating Korean food all the time, then you want to try, right? So Mila was one of the Korean drama fan, and she was always talking about, yeah, Korean food is my favorite, it's my soul food after starting watching Korean drama. And for a lot of times, people say it's familiar but not familiar. It's interesting enough, but I see common things between your culture and my culture. Shared by Braden, who was born in Hong Kong, grew up in Hong Kong, but came to the States when he was like in middle school. So, but, he's an Asian. Definitely Korean food and Chinese food and Japanese food have like a common flavor. But at the same time, that point was shared by a lot of Latinos and Caribbean interviewees. They really emphasize, okay, we eat rice. That's the most important staple in our culture. You do, right? So especially like Latino and Caribbean immigrants, they do emphasize culture, similarity between their culture and Korean culture. But how do Koreans respond? Korean nationals are really happy. That's how they confirm the popularity of their culture and in the national status of their country. Now we are recognized. We are well known. Korean Americans, some people say that yes, and I'm proud of Korean culture, and I'm really happy that finally my culture recognized in American mainstream. Some people think that, yeah, that is a way, it's a regional ethnic tension is, like bridging two different cultures. And a lot of times, Emily was really interesting when I had an interview with her. I ended up talking with her for 2 hours, and she cried twice because of her traumatic experience when she grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood in New Jersey. And but she finally find that their, Korean food is recognized by others. So she was thinking that, probably food became really great mean for us, or to breach boundaries. But not everyone was happy with that. So Sarah was also interesting to talk with. She was really happy to see her food became so much popular in American mainstream. But at the same time, she was not really happy when she saw, white guys standing at the bar trying to just, Broadway the Korean women in Koreatown. And she, was like, I'm really happy, but at the same time, when I see those people at the bar, I'm really getting frustrated. They're invading my safe space. So, so that was, the research that I wanted to share with you. And in order to wrap up this talk, I wanted to bring the history, collective history of Koreatown. As we talked earlier today, obviously, Koreatown was occupied by Jewish, Italian, Irish women who offered cheap labor to garment industry. Obviously, these women, again, always Koreatown was reconstructed by ethnic and racial minority. In the 70s and 80s, of course, the space offer, emergency shelter to homeless families in New York City when, a lot of middle-class Americans left for suburbs and Black American families were left out in the city. Now you see ethnic Koreans and their culture flourished in small section of a global city. But when you talk about authenticity, we don't really go back to the history of the neighborhood and their struggle. But in fact, Koreatown is a space for and has been space for ethnic and racial minority who are trying to survive in this country and give more opportunities for their children. So, Koreatown's authenticity is always reinforced in global market nowadays. Did we lose our soul in Koreatown? but I do pay attention to individual voices. A lot of individuals do recognize what is going on there. They do recognize the market forces, and they decode market power, and they do deconstruct the Western gaze of Korean culture by putting Koreatown, within context of race and ethnicity in American society. So I do look at those individuals as really great people to, reconstruct Koreatown's authenticity rather than, market forces that we strongly believe in there. Yep, that's it. Thank you.
Hello. Well before the 80s, a lot of minority communities were filled with a lot of organized crime.
Yeah.
Was Koreatown subject to that? And how did it change or mold Koreatown to where it is today?
So I don't really have a clear data about crime rate in Koreatown, but when I had an interview with business owners who had business in early 1980s, they're talking about, these families who live in welfare hotel would come to their business, use bathroom, and throw like catch-ups to pedestrians, and people just avoid that. They didn't want to come. I mean, like Koreans do still come because you have to eat and you have to buy stuff, but it wasn't for non-Koreans at the time. Even I don't have data, but that's what I heard from old timers. Yep.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kim, for your research. I'm more familiar with Chinatown, but I guess I have two questions. One is, have you looked at historically the ownership for the buildings? Because you mentioned, I mean, obviously some of these are really huge buildings and probably are very costly. So, in Chinatown, there's issues of gentrification questions, but many of the buildings actually are owned by family associations or whatever, but a land use study would be interesting. So that's one question of just kind of the ownership, and has that changed or how has that changed? And especially with all the development going around. And I guess because I have no idea on the zoning, I guess. The other question is just the development of the internal business community in terms of how they relate to each other, in terms of who are the bigger business, bigger businesses. And I guess tied to that is, how does the economic collective, however you document it, of Koreatown compared to like Flushing or whatever, in terms of dollar amounts of business and so forth. I know that's a very general figure, but economic, I guess, power.
So for the ownership, it wasn't really easy to track down the data because a lot of times the buildings are owned by like corporations. They usually make like LLC, like corporation. But I think the latest data that I read, and the local newspaper article was about half of buildings are owned by Koreans. Yeah, but I wasn't really sure how they get the data and how they calculate it. But few buildings are still owned by Jews and Italian, but about half of them are owned by Koreans too. Yeah, on 32nd Street, strictly speaking. For business community, I don't really have a clear answer on this, and is there any way that, I mean, like I always wonder, and I always wonder if I could get like a clear data about how much money they are making, but it wasn't always, whenever I talk with those business persons in Koreatown, I usually say that I didn't, have a chance to ask like a specific number at the time, but what I can say is, a lot of times those Korean business owners own like multiple businesses, so they are not really small business owners that we just think of, like, when you think about ethnic businesses, mom and pop stores, but it's not really true. Think about Wonju and also 큰 집 actually owned by mother and daughter, right? And also like, person who own 돈스보감 also own, 뚫레주로, and also he owns like a food court, I think. So there are a lot of like multiple, ownership owned by just one person, but they tend to have like multiple businesses across the city.
Yes, I was going to ask maybe like two questions, and one is I actually live in Flushing, and I cannot even discern Chinatown and Koreatown because they just kind of juxtaposed. It's like a Koreatown inside of Chinatown, or they just coexist side by side. How can you, for example, delimit Koreatown from Chinatown in Flushing?
Oh, yeah.
It's like my second question is that are there other Koreatowns in USA, in US cities, similar to this area, similar to 32nd Street?
So 32nd Street is really unique because Flushing Koreatown is much more traditional, pretty close to Chinatown. And also it's a mix with, if you look at actual data, like a population data in Flushing, it's not just Chinese, but also Koreans and Indian. It's a really multi-ethnic neighborhood. And also sometimes you see like a Korean Chinese opening up businesses in Flushing Chinatown. So that's pretty much a mixed place. But Koreatown in Manhattan is, a lot of times when you think about ethnic neighborhood, they offer jobs and housing. But Koreatown in Manhattan does not offer any housing. That's pretty much strictly commercial neighborhood. But they have planned to build a luxurious condo on 32nd Street and Fifth Avenue, I believe. So there will be really big change in the next few years. But in the past, as known as commercial district by New York City government. Yep.
What area in Flushing is Koreatown?
So mostly like a Northern Street, like, they used to have stores on Main Street, but I remember that, they are pushed out, those immigrants use the word pushed out by Chinese. Yeah, so they tend to move toward further in like a Bayside area and Northern Street. Yeah, Northern Boulevard and Union Street.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we get one last question.
It's very interesting. You talked about then and now, Koreatown. What do you think about the future?
So a lot of times, whenever we talk about urban issues in New York City, people talk about gentrification all the time. And people ask, is there any sign of gentrification in Koreatown? And I was like, not really yet. But you see like a new rezoning plan by New York City, and also they're building a lot of luxurious condos around the Koreatown. And Nomad is really popular nowadays, bringing a lot of business revenue, business opportunity, as well as luxurious condos, and of course luxurious condos and hotels. So things gonna change a lot in the next few years, and also you see a lot of big corporations investing into Koreatown, pushing out small number of immigrants who used to own their business there. So it's gonna be still transnational in the future. That's what I believe in the next few years. I think yes, and also it could be interesting if gentrification is happening in Koreatown, because we see the development plan in Midtown Manhattan, and definitely it's going to have an impact on Koreatown's landscape in the future. For a lot of times, I have to say, sociologists always complain things, but we don't really predict the future. And so, yeah, that's what we do. Sorry about this, but yeah, that's our job.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kim, for your wonderful talk. I'm sure we'll all look at the 30 seconds in a very different way.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much for coming.